Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group where we study the words of the Buddha in this book series titled The Words of the Buddha, The Path to Enlightenment, Revealing the Hidden. In this program, we go through volumes 2 through 13 of this book series, where on Sundays and Wednesdays we have a group learning program which goes through volume 1. That's a really great program to lay a nice foundation of understanding the teachings of the Buddha, building this framework so that you'll understand the path to enlightenment and how to train the mind on this path. And then this particular program is really helpful if you've already had a nice foundation developed and you're looking to fill in that framework so that you can understand more of the teachings of the Buddha and really get into the fine details of his teachings. So today we're in volume 10, chapters 41 through 46. We're going to be going through our study group as we normally do. Normally we have 10 chapters, but today, since we're finishing up this book, we only have 6 chapters to study. And then next week, we're going to be moving into volume 11, chapters 1 through 10. This book is titled The Realms of Existence. That's volume 11. And there you'll be learning all about the various realms. And it's volume 11 for a reason, because it's something you usually approach later in your development of your life practice. But today we're finishing up this book titled The Buddha's Way, which is volume 10 of this book series. And I'm going to be exploring all 6 of these chapters with you today. The way that we do our class is I invite students or myself will read this particular chapter, each one, chapter by chapter. Then I'll share some teachings on that chapter and then open up to any and all questions that you might have related to that specific chapter. If you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions by putting those into the comment section. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions that you like. If there's anyone in Zoom who would like to read, you're welcome to raise your hand electronically and I'll see that and be able to call on you to read any of the chapters that we're studying today. So this first chapter, this one is chapter 41 of volume 10. It's titled Wisdom, Mindfulness, and Name and Form, Stopped by the Stopping of Consciousness. Wisdom and mindfulness, said Venerable Ajita, and name and form, sir. Tell me this when asked, where is this stopped? I shall answer this question which you have asked, Ajita. Where name and form is completely stopped, by the stopping of consciousness, there it is stopped. Okay, to understand this chapter, you need to understand chapter 40, which is what we finished up with last week. Chapter 40 is dependent origination. I'm going to go backwards and be sure that students who are learning Chapter 41 have at least understood Chapter 40 to a certain degree, because dependent origination is the highest, most ultimate truth of the teachings of the Buddha. This is where you see all the details of exactly why your mind experiences discontentedness and why you keep experiencing rebirth over and over and over. And remember, the teachings of the Buddha, they're to be learned, which means you're investigating and examining them. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them. And then you're practicing them. And you're going to need to do some of that here in the class, but there's also work you need to do outside of class. You're not going to be able to just do the work inside of a class like this. You're going to need to do work outside of class too, because I'm usually just teaching to a certain level of detail and then waiting for students to penetrate more deeply into the content so that I know where you need clarification or where you need help independently verifying some of these teachings. So this particular teaching, I go through it in detail when I do the retreat in January, which is all the things that you need in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Because with dependent origination, you would need this in order to get to that first stage of enlightenment. So I spend about an hour and a half just teaching dependent origination as part of that retreat. But in this Pali Canon and English study group, it shows up about 2 or 3 times throughout the entire year and a half program. And when it does, I teach it to a certain level of detail, and then I wait for students to ask more questions so we can go deeper into it. This is one of those teachings that you need to investigate multiple times, and you really need to sit with it and think about it and reflect on it using the words of the Buddha, and then the reflections that I share as part of each chapter as well. Because as part of this chapter, not only do you have all the words of the Buddha here, but you have words from me, and you have tables that'll be able to help you to be able to understand dependent origination in more detail. You're going to need to know this just to get to the first stage of enlightenment, among other teachings as well. So what I'm going to do is walk you through this just to be sure I kind of refresh anybody's memory who was learning last week, but also any new students who are maybe joining that didn't join last week, or maybe you've been studying with me for a while and you just didn't attend class last week. Let's be sure you understand dependent origination so that you'll understand chapter 41. Here, the Buddha is giving you the detailed examples showing you cause and effect of what leads to discontentedness and rebirth. From a high level, let's look at it here, that it's because of ignorance, this unknowing of true reality, that craving continues to exist, this craving and clinging. And because of craving and clinging, with ignorance coming first, this is the whole reason why the mind experiences discontentedness. So when we talk about the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, or 3 fires, we say craving, anger, and ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality, where craving is that longing and yearning, the chasing after the objects of your affection. If you get what you want, you get pleasant feelings. If you don't get what you want, you get painful feelings. And then there's the neither painful nor pleasant feelings. And then some of those painful feelings that the mind sometimes experiences is anger or hatred or ill will, frustration, irritation, annoyance, even dislike, where you just dislike somebody. That's because of craving. The mind is having certain longing, yearning. And if you get what you want, you get pleasant feelings. If you don't get what you want, you get the painful feelings. So this craving and anger, and then there's this ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality. This anger is like bitterness and hostility, pushing people away, pushing situations away, being bitter and harsh and hostile towards people, and putting your expectations on people, trying to control them to do things your way. So it's because of craving and anger that the mind is experiencing this continuous discontentedness. But it's ignorance that is keeping all of this going. So even though we call it craving, anger, and ignorance, it's because of ignorance that craving and anger continues to exist. You can see that here, that the Buddha is showing you on this top line. If you think about this like an equation, the top line of this math problem is ignorance. And then the next thing is, looking down here, is craving and clinging. And then what that's producing is then the discontentedness, if you think about it like an equation. So if you understand this, then you start to understand why you're motivated and encouraged to cultivate wisdom. Because by cultivating wisdom, you're antidoting this ignorance. You're dismantling these 12 steps. These 12 individual interlinking steps are showing you what's leading to discontentedness. Because what it's sharing with you is, because of ignorance, the mind has this craving and clinging, and then there's this discontentedness that is experienced. But if you antidote and eliminate ignorance, if you get to wisdom, which is wisdom in the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, meditation training, the natural law of karma, and all these other teachings that the Buddha shares, if you get to wisdom, where you're learning, reflecting to independently verify and practice, then your mind can be transformed. And remember, this ignorance doesn't get completely transformed until you're actually practicing the teachings. So when we talk about cultivating wisdom, there's a certain amount of intellectual learning that you need to do, but then there's implementing that in your practice. You might intellectually understand the 5 precepts, but you're not maybe fully practicing the 5 precepts. So there's still ignorance in the mind because the mind hasn't figured out how to practice them. Or you might understand something like sensual desire, but you're not having fully eliminated it yet. So you haven't fully cultivated the wisdom. So you're learning, reflecting, and practicing, first doing the intellectual learning and then implementing that in your practice. And that's where the real transformation of the mind is occurring, where you're fully cultivating wisdom. And then having done so, all through all these interlinking steps, which I'm going to describe, you will have eliminated craving and clinging. And by eliminating craving and clinging, you will have eliminated discontentedness. So it's because of this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality that then there's certain volitional formations that come to be, or choices and decisions. Choices and decisions are now being made in the unenlightened state through ignorance. And as long as you're making these unwise decisions, like continuing to crave, continuing to have anger, continuing to be bitter and harsh and hostile to people, there's going to continue to be these unwise decisions that are producing unwholesome karma. So it's because of ignorance that these volitional formations or choices and decisions continue to be unwise and continue to produce this unwholesome karma. And now with those volitional formations being made that are unwise, one of the things that is occurring is that craving continues to exist. So now it's going to produce this consciousness. There's this new consciousness that comes to be. The consciousness is the mind. Now when there's that new consciousness as condition, then it's going to find a name and form, or it's going to take up a name and form. What name and form is the physical body. The Buddha goes into detail about what name and form is in his teachings, which is here in this particular chapter. But you can think of it as the physical body. That's the best way to think about it. That as long as there's a consciousness that has come into existence, it needs to find a name and form, a physical body. Now with that consciousness and name and form, now it's going to start producing the 6 sense bases. This is the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. Inside the womb of our mother, the 6 sense bases are starting to develop and starting to mature. And when we're born, now those 6 sense bases come to fruition. With those 6 sense bases starting to develop inside the womb of our mother's stomach, now there's going to be this contact through the 6 sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind. And then when there's contact being experienced with contact as condition, then you're going to start experiencing these feelings, the pleasant feelings, the painful feelings, the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. When those feelings start to be experienced, particularly the pleasant feelings, then the mind's going to start craving. It's going to start longing, yearning, wanting those pleasant feelings over and over and over again. When the mind is craving and there's this longing, yearning for these pleasant feelings, then when you get the objects of your affection and you're experiencing those pleasant feelings, then the mind's going to cling and hold on to these objects or relationships or thoughts or anything that the mind is craving. Once it acquires it and now it experiences those pleasant feelings, it's going to start clinging to this. Now with clinging and holding on, now this produces existence, where now a being is coming into existence. Then with existence, there's going to be birth, where a being is born into the world. When there's birth, then there's going to be aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. These are the discontent feelings starting to be experienced. The aging and death, this is impermanence, but then the sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, this is the discontentedness that is going to be experienced. As long as a being is born, it's going to experience the sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is why when you come into the world as a baby, immediately you start crying, because you're craving inside the womb of your mother and you're clinging to this environment, wanting it to be permanent. And now when impermanence comes along and you need to come out into the world and you're born, now because of birth, now you're going to experience this aging and death, which is the impermanence, but you're also experiencing the sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is how the whole mass of discontentedness comes to be. So it's this ignorance that's keeping everything continuing to go on over and over and over again. If it wasn't for ignorance, craving and anger wouldn't continue to exist. So this is the 12 interlinking steps that is showing you how the mind keeps being born over and over. The mind keeps coming back into the world. There keeps being this new consciousness and this new body that is coming into existence over and over and over again. And because of that, then there's going to be discontentedness in each one of those existences. But the way that you escape all of this is you antidote this ignorance, because ignorance is the thing that kind of puts it all into motion. If you can cultivate wisdom and train your mind, you can eliminate that first cause and condition. That if you don't have ignorance, then you won't have volitional formations based in that ignorance. And if you don't have volitional formations based in ignorance, they're based in wisdom. Now you're making wise decisions. You've eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance, and now there won't be a consciousness that comes into existence, and so forth and so on. All of these things are eliminated. So here, the Buddha is talking about how consciousness finds this name and form. So this is the mind and the body coming together in a particular existence. And now this chapter 41 is talking about how to end consciousness. Essentially what this chapter is doing is this particular student, who's a female, is asking the Buddha, how do I stop continuing to be reborn over and over? She's asking here, wisdom and mindfulness, said Venerable Ajita, and name and form, sir, tell me this when asked, where is it stopped? She's asking, where does this taking up of the body, name and form, where does it stop? It keeps going on and on and on. That's what the Buddha is talking about in all of his teachings, about this rebirth on and on and on. And she's asking, how do I stop this? And the Buddha says, okay, he's going to answer. Where name and form is completely stopped, by the stopping of consciousness, there it is stopped. Okay, so because there's ignorance, then there's volitional formations, then there's consciousness, then there's name and form. So by stopping consciousness to keep coming into the world over and over and over again, then it won't take up this name and form. This physical body, you spend an enormous amount of time taking care of it. You brush your teeth, you wash the body, you clothe the body, you get haircuts, you clean your eyes, you urinate, you defecate, you feed the body, you go to medical checkups, you do all these things to take care of this physical body. But yet you haven't done what you needed to do in order to stop it from picking up this consciousness, where the consciousness is coming into the body. It keeps doing this over and over and over again because of this lack of wisdom, this ignorance or unknowing of true reality. So it's this wisdom and mindfulness that is going to help you to be able to get to the point where consciousness can be stopped. Because if there's no more consciousness, then it won't take up a name and form. And the way that you do that is through cultivating wisdom. So let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can ask those through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can electronically raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, Biplab, you have a question? Go ahead, sir.
Hello, sir. I do not understand stopping the consciousness. How could I stop the consciousness? What is the procedure?
Sure. This is the stopping of consciousness to come back into the world. You can't stop consciousness as long as there's a life. So in this life, there is a consciousness, which is the mind, and there is a name and form, which is the physical body. So you're not stopping consciousness in this life. You're stopping consciousness in that consciousness picking up a name and form for a future life. So that's what this student is asking the Buddha is, how do I stop continuing to be reborn over and over and over again? That's what she's asking him, is how do I stop coming back into this world over and over again? How do I stop taking up this physical body over and over and over again? And the Buddha says, well, the way you stop picking up this physical body over and over again is you need to stop consciousness. By stopping consciousness, meaning not allowing consciousness to continue to exist. So in other teachings, the Buddha talks about how craving is the fuel that causes this rebirth and causes the mind to come back into the world. So if there's craving at the time of death, that's the fuel that's causing this new consciousness to be created. It's just like a fire. If you have a fire with a bunch of logs on it, that's the fuel. And now as long as there's fuel in this fire, these logs are sending off sparks into the air. The air's carrying that the spark is landing, and now it's creating a new mind, or a new fire in this case, right? If you're talking about a fire. So if you have this fire of craving burning in the mind at the time of death, it now is going to produce this new consciousness. So the way to stop consciousness, or here the question is the way to stop name and form, the way to stop these physical bodies from continuing to exist, is to get to the point where you stop consciousness. And it's wisdom that's going to help you to be able to do that if you understand dependent origination. So it's about stopping consciousness from creating a new consciousness. So you're not stopping it in this life, you're stopping a new one from being created.
Has there any relation between volitional formation, consciousness,
Yes.
or ignorance?
Yes. So what this student is asking the Buddha is, how do I eliminate this name and form right here? How do I eliminate that physical body? And if you understand dependent origination, you already know the answer. That because name and form is coming about because of consciousness, with consciousness as condition, that's what now is joining together with the physical body. So if you understand dependent origination, you already know the answer without even seeing what the Buddha says, because you understand that the cause and condition of name and form is consciousness. So here's consciousness as condition. It's now coming together with name and form. And then because of that, the way that you eliminate consciousness, the way you stop consciousness, is you go all the way back to the beginning of dependent origination, where you understand that you need to eliminate the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality, so that you're no longer making unwise decisions or volitional formations through this ignorance. That's how you stop consciousness. So the Buddha is just explaining to this student this part of dependent origination, but in order to really fully get the answer, because the next question would be, okay, well, if the way that you stop name and form is to stop consciousness, well, how do you stop consciousness? Well, okay, the way you stop consciousness is you have volitional formations that are based in wisdom. Because as long as you have volitional formations that are based in ignorance, it's going to keep producing a new consciousness. So what dependent origination is helping you to do, among other things like helping you to understand the cycle of rebirth and helping you to understand how discontentedness comes to be in the mind, it's showing you what you need to focus on this path to enlightenment. What you need to focus on is eradicating this ignorance. This is why from the very first time someone studies with me, I encourage them to never believe anything I say, but to cultivate wisdom. Because I know the ultimate truth is dependent origination. And that's the ultimate thing that a practitioner on the path to enlightenment is going to need to understand in order to be able to get to enlightenment. So even though they're not able to understand that on their first day of learning with me, they're not ready to approach dependent origination, I set them up from the very beginning to understand their goal is to cultivate wisdom. And then this is the reason why. Because by cultivating wisdom, it will produce volitional formations that are based in wisdom. And then ultimately you can get to a point where the mind's enlightened, and then there won't be any rebirth after that, because all the causes and conditions that are leading to consciousness and name and form have been eradicated. You're welcome. Pleased to help you, Biplab. I see there's a question here on Facebook from Mayu Lee. She's asking, just want to verify, name and form is essentially the 5 aggregates. Name consists of volitional formations, feelings, perceptions, consciousness, and form consists of the 4 elements. Am I understanding correct? Yes, but there's one thing you're missing here. That name also includes contact. So it's these 4 aggregates plus contact. So let me show you here, Mayu Lee, that the Buddha explains this here. When he talks about name and form, it's all the 4 aggregates: feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, which is right here. And then there's this contact. So those 5 things are called name. So it's the 4 aggregates and then contact. That's what name is. And form is the first aggregate of the 5 aggregates. But the way that you then understand what form aggregate is, it's the 4 elements. And essentially what they used the 4 elements for during the lifetime of the Buddha is to explain the physical body. It's earth, wind, water, and fire. These 4 elements are describing the body. So the earth element is like the solids, like the teeth, the hair, the bones. This is the earth element. The water element are the fluids of the body, like the tears, the saliva, the urine, the blood, the pus, the semen. This is all the fluids and the various fluids in the body. Then the fire is the temperature of the body, oftentimes associated with digestion. And then the wind in the body is the movement, like the movement of the blood. The blood itself is the water element, but the movement of the blood is the wind. Or like the movement of food through the intestine, this is the wind element. Or flagellants, right? If somebody farts, this is the wind element, right? So the movement of things in the body is the wind element. So they would describe the body in detail through the earth, water, wind, and fire. And I'm just giving you a very basic description here, but I gave you more inside this particular chapter. And this is how not only did they describe the body, but they also diagnosed and treated the body through medicine with the 4 elements. Nowadays, we would describe the body in terms of cells and atoms and bones and these kinds of things, right? Like the molecular things that we understand as part of science 2,500 years later. But this is the way they described it then. So even though this is what name and form is, I encourage students to just think about it as the physical body. That's the best way to think about it. But knowing the detail that, yes, it's feeling, perception, volitional formations, contact, in consciousness. That's what name is. And then form is the 4 elements. But really, that's relating to the physical body itself, where the name is more about what's going on with the mind and contact itself. So yes, that's what you would like to know there. Okay, let me see if there's any more questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So this particular chapter 41 is helping you to understand how to eliminate the taking up of a physical body over and over and over again, how to stop this continuous rebirth. The way to stop this continuous rebirth is to stop consciousness from coming into existence. The way that you stop consciousness from coming into existence is you eliminate ignorance and volitional formations that are based on ignorance. So that's why you're always working to cultivate wisdom and make wise decisions that are going to produce wholesome results or wholesome karma. That's how you stop discontentedness, and that's how you stop consciousness from coming back into the world over and over again and picking up this physical body or this name and form. Okay, so now we'll do chapter 42. And remember, anyone in Zoom that would like to read, you're welcome to volunteer by raising your hand electronically. This one is titled, Without Clinging, One Attains Nibbana, or Enlightenment. Here, Ananda, a monk is practicing thus. If it were not, it would not be mine. It will not be, and it will not be mine. What exists, what has come to be, that I am abandoning. Thus, he obtains equanimity. He does not seek excitement in that equanimity, welcome it, or remain holding to it. Since he does not do so, his consciousness does not become dependent on it and does not cling to it. A monk, Ananda, who is without clinging, attains nibbana, or enlightenment. So part of getting to enlightenment, a big part of it, is to eliminate craving and clinging. When you're first learning with me, I describe craving and clinging as essentially the same thing. But as you get deeper into learning the teachings, I help you to understand that these are actually 2 different things, as you see in dependent origination. The craving is the mind longing and yearning for a particular object. That's the chasing after the objects of your affection, being pulled towards a particular object. The clinging is the holding on to it. Right? So if you have a certain object that you're walking through the mall and you see an object in the window of a store, maybe a new pair of shoes or a new phone or a new computer, you might have a certain craving, a longing, a yearning that comes up in the mind, and now you're longing and yearning for that object. That's a craving. But now you go into the store and you buy it and you get all these pleasant feelings, happy, excited because of this new object. Now the mind clings to this new object, wanting it to be permanent. This is the difference between craving and clinging. And what the Buddha is saying here is that you need to eliminate all clinging in order to get to enlightenment, including the clinging to any of the qualities of mind that are produced as a result of getting closer and closer to enlightenment. This equanimity that he's talking about, this is a quality of mind that needs to be cultivated in order to get to enlightenment. Equanimity is calmness and composure, evenness of temper, especially in a difficult situation, being able to maintain your calmness. And the reason why that's important is because when the mind is calm, then you can have mindfulness or awareness of mind. When you have mindfulness and awareness of mind, you can then have concentration, which is focus and clarity of mind. When you have focus and clarity of mind, you can then access wisdom and make wise decisions that lead to wholesome results. As long as you allow your mind to be uncalm or shaken up, then there isn't mindfulness, there isn't awareness of mind, there isn't concentration or focus and clarity. So then you can't access wisdom. So that means you're going to keep making volitional formations. You're going to keep making choices and decisions based in ignorance. You're trying to get to a point where all your decisions are wise, and now you're producing only wholesome karma. But that's going to take time for you. But equanimity is an important role in that, because that's what's going to allow you to make wise decisions when your mind is calm, because you can access the wisdom through having mindfulness and concentration. Then you can have wisdom. If you think about this as an example, like say you got a phone call that your mom was in a terrible car accident and she's in the hospital. If you don't have equanimity, you're going to be panicked, you're going to be shaken up, you might hurry up and grab your car keys or run out the door and bolt for this hospital. On the way, you might get into an accident, or you might trip and fall, or you might have other difficulties, or at the very least, if you show up to the hospital, your mind's going to be all shaken up. And when the doctors and nurses are talking to you, you're not going to be able to comprehend what it is they're sharing with you to then be able to make wise decisions and help your mom. Whereas if you get that news that your mom was in a terrible car accident and you can maintain your equanimity, understanding that, okay, mom's health is impermanent. She's not going to permanently be healthy. Now there's been some impermanence. The best thing you can do in a difficult situation is maintain your equanimity, your calmness and composure. And now with your calmness and composure, you make your way to the hospital. Knowing that mom's at the hospital, she's at the very best place she could be, and there's people caring for her there. So you just gradually make your way to the hospital, and when you show up, you have maintained your calmness and composure. So now you have calmness, you have mindfulness, you have concentration, which is with clarity of mind, and now you can access your wisdom. You can listen to the doctors and nurses, understand what's going on, and now you can make wise decisions that's going to produce wholesome results for mom and for you as well. But if your mind's all shaken up, you're not going to be able to do that. So you can apply this equanimity in all situations, whether your children come home from school with a report card that you think is not necessarily the best. Don't allow your mind to be shaken up. You're going to start making unwise decisions. Or if you get a phone call from school about your children getting injured or getting into a fight or having some kind of problem, or you hear about a tree has fallen on your house and now your house is damaged, maintain your equanimity. Allowing the mind to be shaken up in those situations is just allowing the mind to be uncontrolled and undisciplined based on its cravings. So by maintaining your equanimity, you're going to be able to make wise decisions that produce wholesome results. But what the Buddha is talking about here specifically is he's saying that the mind needs to not even have clinging to equanimity, because by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's going to have all the four healthy mental states. There's loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. I'm going to be talking about these tomorrow in the group learning program, teaching you what they are antidoting in terms of certain symptoms in the mind. And I'm going to teach you how to cultivate these four healthy mental states as well. But as you're making your way to enlightenment, even though an enlightened being has fully cultivated loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, among other qualities, on your way to enlightenment, you're going to be experiencing a certain amount of equanimity or a certain amount of these other qualities of mind, but they're not yet permanent. So if you cling to the equanimity and you get excited, like the Buddha's talking about here, if you get excited and remain holding on to it, now when that equanimity is in the mind, you'll have pleasant feelings. You'll be excited because you've got equanimity and you can see your mind so calm and composed. But when that equanimity is gone, because your mind is not yet enlightened, so it's not fully developed and it's not fully there all the time yet, now you're going to have painful feelings. So you need to get to the point where you're not even clinging to those qualities of enlightenment, like the peace, the calm, the serenity, the contentedness and joy. Because if you start clinging to these qualities, when those qualities are there, you'll be happy. And when they're not there, you'll be sad or frustrated. It's kind of like you'll experience discontentedness because maybe you stumped your toe, or maybe somebody broke your mobile phone, or maybe you lost your job. And now you'll be discontent because of that, but then you're going to be discontent because your equanimity is gone as well. So you'll have discontentedness because of your discontentedness. You'll be discontent because you're discontent, right? So by training the mind to not even cling to those qualities is very important. So as your qualities of mind are improving and you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, and you see the peace, the calm, the serenity, the contentedness, and the joy, or this equanimity, which is the calmness, when you start seeing that come into the mind, don't get all excited. Like, oh my goodness, the teachings of the Buddha lead exactly where he said they did. Oh my goodness, I can see those qualities coming into the mind now. Oh wow, I'm so excited. No, because that's going to end up with painful feelings, right? So when you see that equanimity arising, it's just like, okay, I see you, equanimity. Yep. You know it's there, and you just keep on going in your day, right? You don't really indulge in that. You don't excite in it and welcome it and remain holding on to it, because your mind is not yet enlightened. You need to get to the point where you're not even clinging to the qualities of enlightenment. So you know it's there, you notice it's there because you're going to have your mindfulness, but you don't get excited because it's there. That's very important. So let me know what questions you guys have on this particular chapter where the Buddha is teaching you to eliminate all clinging, including the clinging to the qualities of the mind that are starting to be experienced as you get closer and closer to enlightenment. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 43. This one is titled, By Not Clinging They Are Freed. Clinging they look upon with fear, for it produces birth and death, and by not clinging they are freed. In the destruction of birth and death they reside in joy, for they are safe, and reach nibbana, enlightenment, here and now. They are beyond all fear and hate. They have escaped all discontentedness. So here the Buddha is explaining that when an individual understands clinging, you look at it as completely undesirable, that you're not interested in clinging whatsoever. When you understand that clinging to anything in your life is going to ultimately end up in painful feelings, then you get to the point where you're disinterested in clinging at all. And you need to train the mind to be able to get to that point. It's not going to just magically start to experience that. Even intellectually, when you understand clinging, you need to train the mind where you're just disinterested in clinging. So even though he's using the word fear here, that an enlightened being, by the time you get to enlightenment, you have no fear whatsoever. All clinging has been eliminated. There's no fear whatsoever. But on your way to enlightenment, you need to get to the point where you're disinterested in clinging. Because what you understand about clinging is it's producing discontentedness, and it's producing this birth and death over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's why you're disinterested in clinging, because you know you're just going to keep being reborn over and over and over again. And part of that is you're going to keep experiencing painful feelings. And this is why it becomes disinterested. And because of not clinging, the mind is free. You have this liberation, this freedom from strong feelings. That's what he's talking about there. When the mind's eliminated clinging, then you've destroyed birth and death. You are then safe. The mind is residing in this joy. And then an individual has reached enlightenment here and now, meaning you've attained enlightenment because you're no longer clinging. Once you eliminate the clinging and you've attained enlightenment, you're beyond all fear and hate. It's not possible for you to have fear. It's physically impossible for an enlightened being to have fear, to have anger, to have frustration, irritation, annoyance, any of those feelings, because all the causes and conditions that are causing those things to arise, they're completely eliminated from the mind. So an individual is beyond all of that. They're physically impossible. It's just not possible because the causes and conditions don't exist anymore. So all this fear and hate, even the slightest dislike, has been eliminated from the enlightened mind. You will be to the point where there's not even anyone in the world that you dislike. Right now, there might be people that you dislike. Of course, there's stronger feelings like anger, hatred, and ill will, but then there's those lesser versions like someone you just dislike. The only reason why you have that dislike towards them is because they're still craving and clinging in the mind, and you haven't fully cultivated loving kindness and compassion yet. So as you eliminate craving and clinging and you fully cultivate loving kindness and compassion, you'll get to the point where there isn't even a dislike in the mind towards a particular being. You're beyond all this fear and hate and even those lesser versions. You've escaped all discontentedness. It's physically impossible for an enlightened being to ever be discontent ever again because the causes and conditions have been eradicated. Their mind has attained final knowledge, where the mind is fully cultivated wisdom and completely dismantled dependent origination 100%. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? Okay, looks like Francis, you have a question.
Okay, something interesting happened actually when you mentioned about the being disinterested in all these ill feelings or what is this unhealthy state of mind. Because I think you know that I always have a lot of this irritation towards my mom and she does things that's not right. The couple of days, something happened is that, I finally say I'm no longer interested in holding on to any of the irritation and annoyance. I just see things as they are, and if it doesn't do right, I say, okay, I try to talk to her nicely. And I felt very at peace with myself. So every time that she does something not right, I just cut it off and let it go and tell myself that I'm really not going to get into this irritation, annoyance mindset anymore. So my question is that being aware and knowing what I need to do is not clinging, isn't it?
Yeah, the mind is still craving and clinging. And you're also judging mom. You're thinking that what she's doing is either right or wrong, right? So that's like the judgment. And then there's certain craving and clinging of things you want her to do. So you would like to get to the point where you understand that mom's making the decisions that she's making based on her own experiences in life. And it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's not the way that you would choose to do things, but it's the way she's choosing to do things. And that's her choices. And you could provide her guidance or suggestions or ideas of other things she might decide to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's her decision. And she may not choose to do what it is that you're suggesting. And you need to be comfortable with that. So don't judge it as she's doing something right or wrong. Just see it as different than what you're doing.
Actually, I also stopped making judgment on the things that she does, not like before. So, I don't judge her. I just aware that, oh no, she did something that is like that already. She spilled the water over the plate and all that, or whatever, the cup. Then I say, okay, I just wipe it off and all that. I don't like last time get irritated, annoyed with her. Mm-hmm. So, I still feel that I need to know how to remove this clinging that you just mentioned on that. I thought I was able to remove that clinging, but now you mentioned to me, it's not, I'm still clinging to it. So I need to know how should I think, in my mind.
Okay, so if you keep with the breathing mindfulness meditation and the generosity, which is the generalized training to eliminate craving and clinging, and then your mind needs to be in this situation enough times where you can cut it off and cut it off and cut it off before it ever arises in the mind. So it needs to be triggered enough times. So if I was talking to your mom, I would be like, keep spilling the water. I'd encourage her to keep spilling the water because Francis needs to experience that enough times that you can cut it off and you just understand like, okay, no big deal. It's water. It's impermanent. I'll just clean it up. It's not a big deal. It's a 3-second thing. It's a 10-second thing. When you were a child, I'm sure you spilled plenty of things. I'm sure you broke plenty of things. And mom was right there to clean all those things up for you. And you just don't remember it because you were too young, right? So this is mom's karma and this is your karma because you spilled all these things when you were a child and mom cleaned those up. Now, mom is spilling all these things, and now you need to clean it up, right? This is the karma coming back to you. So just look at it as you're caring for mom and you're returning her karma back to her. That she did all this wholesome karma all throughout her life to care for you. And now you're in a situation where you're able to return that karma back to her and take care of her in the same way that she cared for you.
Yeah. Lastly, actually, that what I did was I call up the elements of loving kindness, equanimity in my mind, and say that okay, I'm remain calm and at peace and all that, and just like I said, I just clean it up and all that. Okay, now I know that I don't make a judgment. I just do what I need to do. And if let's say I were my mom when I was young, I feel water. She didn't scold me. You just wipe it off and then tell me next time be more careful. So is that what I should do?
Yeah, but realizing that your mom is in a declining state, right? When you were a baby, you were needing to grow and you were needing to build your motor skills and you were needing to develop your wisdom to be better about not spilling cups of water. Your mom is on the other side of that. Her motor skills are declining and that's why she's spilling water. And she's not going to probably get to a point where she's no longer spilling water because she's in a declining state where she was encouraging you to increase your skills and ability. So she's probably going to be spilling water all the way through to the end of her life, unless you decide to do something different, like get her a cup that has a closed lid and a straw, maybe. This is something that oftentimes as we are being born and brought into the world, as we're aging, we have diapers, we need help with water and food and getting in and out of bed and taking a shower and bathing and all these things as we're a baby. But then as we get older and we're starting to decline, we start doing all those same things again. We need diapers, perhaps. We need help getting in and out of the bathtub and taking a shower. We need help eating. So these are all things that we do as we're getting closer to death. So this is something that you should know is going to probably continue all the way until our death. And you taking care of your mom is one of the very best things you could ever do to return her karma back to her, to show her your appreciation and gratitude for what she's done for you, which is she's giving you this life. And now that you have this human life, this is the best opportunity for you to get to enlightenment. So the best thing you could do is take care of the individuals who actually provided you the ability to come into this world and be able to now get to a point where you can train the mind and get to enlightenment.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Francis. Let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 44. This one is titled Calm in Reflection, Have Part in True Wisdom. Monks, these two qualities have part in true wisdom. What two? Calm in reflection. If cultivated, what profit does calm attain? The mind is cultivated. What profit results from a cultivated mind? All craving is abandoned. Monks, if reflection is cultivated, what profit does it attain? Wisdom is cultivated. If wisdom is cultivated, what profit does it attain? All ignorance is abandoned. A mind defiled by craving is not liberated, and wisdom defiled by ignorance, a knowing of true reality, is not developed. Thus, monks, through the fading away of craving, there is liberation of mind, and through the fading away of ignorance, a knowing of true reality, there is liberation by wisdom. Okay, so the Buddha is describing two certain qualities here. Calm and reflection. These are two things that you're going to need to develop. That calm is the equanimity that we've been talking about, because when the mind's calm, you can access mindfulness, you can cultivate the mind, have that awareness of mind, you can cultivate the concentration and clarity of mind, and then you can access wisdom and make wise decisions. So you're interested in having that calm. So the Buddha is saying, okay, what profit does calm attain? Well, the mind is cultivated. When the mind is cultivated, what does that benefit? Well, then all craving is abandoned. Because when your mind is uncalm, when it's shaken up, that's because of craving. The mind is longing and yearning. The mind is shaking up. It's unstable. It's unsteady. So if you can train your mind to be calm, having that equanimity, then you'll eliminate all craving, right? And there's certain teachings that the Buddha is providing you, certain tools and techniques of how to do that with like breathing mindfulness meditation, generosity. The whole Eightfold Path is helping you to cultivate the mind and train the mind to be able to eliminate all craving. So now, understanding that you need to cultivate this calm, which then leads to the elimination of craving. Then the next thing one needs to cultivate is reflection. Reflection is this inward looking eye, this introspection where you're looking in at the mind and you're developing the ability to be able to see true reality, that the teachings of the Buddha are there for you to learn and intellectually understand, but then you start reflecting on them. You start looking at certain direct experiences that you've had over the course of your life and things that you know that are happening around you, to start reflecting on whether these teachings are true or whether they're false. And then ultimately you move the teachings into practice, which transforms the mind. So this reflection is what leads to this wisdom. By being inward looking and having this introspection, you ultimately cultivate this wisdom. So wisdom is cultivated. When wisdom is cultivated, what profit does it attain? Well, all ignorance is abandoned. That's that dependent origination. That's what you're ultimately trying to get to, is the elimination of ignorance. So by cultivating the mind with calm and reflection, you're eliminating craving and you're eliminating ignorance, the unknowing of true reality. And if you're eliminating these, you will also be able to eliminate the anger, which that's how you get to enlightenment, is by eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance, the three unwholesome roots. And you're antidoting that with generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. Those are the exact opposites. And then the Buddha says, a mind defiled by craving is not liberated, because the craving is the pollution of mind. As long as there's that longing, yearning, the attachment, the desire, the chasing after the objects of your affection, the mind is all bound up. Liberation is where the mind's free. So if you have craving that you want everybody to respect you, you're craving permanence, you want it, you expect it, you long for it, you yearn for it. Well, when people respect you, you'll get pleasant feelings like happiness and excitement. But when people don't respect you, you'll get agitated and annoyed and frustrated. Your mind's not liberated. It's bound up because of this craving. And when wisdom is defiled by ignorance, it is not developed. So if you just have intellectual understanding of the teachings, you haven't actually moved them into practice yet. The mind still has ignorance. The progress in the path to enlightenment, yes, there's an intellectual journey that you need to develop the understanding of the teachings intellectually. But ignorance doesn't get actually eliminated until you implement the teachings in your daily life. So you might understand something like the 5 precepts intellectually, but you're not practicing them. That's because there's still ignorance. There's still confusion and misunderstanding in the mind. You might intellectually understand the Eightfold Path, but you're not practicing it. So the mind hasn't fully cultivated the wisdom or any other teachings that the Buddha shares. So wisdom defiled by ignorance, the mind is not yet fully developed. Thus, monks, through the fading away of craving, there is liberation of mind. So as you're developing your mind, craving doesn't just completely disappear in the snap of a finger. It gradually fades away. And that's why you see the qualities of enlightenment gradually increase in the mind as you're getting rid of more and more of the pollution of craving. Gradually over time, then the qualities of that peace and calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy gradually start to shine through, where you start noticing more brightness and radiance of the enlightened mind, the peace and the joy, the concentration, the clarity of mind. You'll notice more and more relationships are starting to be improved because you're decreasing the pollution in your mind, so you're increasing the qualities of enlightenment starting to shine through. So as the fading away of craving is experienced, then there's liberation of mind. Through the fading away of ignorance or unknowing of true reality, then the mind is liberated by wisdom. So as you cultivate this wisdom in the mind, going back to dependent origination, which we just studied, you understand why the Buddha is pointing to wisdom regularly, because that's what's going to ultimately eliminate the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. And that's why you don't believe any of the teachings of the Buddha. You learn, reflect, to independently verify, and you practice. And it's in your practice where the mind is really, truly transforming. You need to do the intellectual learning, but if that's all you ever did, you wouldn't experience the improvement to the condition of the mind. This is where you can see scholars or academics or historians or anthropologists who are just studying the teachings of the Buddha from a historical context. They might understand through a certain level of intellectual learning, but they still have this unknowing of true reality, this ignorance where they're not practicing the teachings and their mind hasn't fully cultivated wisdom. So that's where you really fully understand the teachings of the Buddha. Intellectual understanding of the Buddha is important, but you don't fully understand until you're actually practicing the teachings. And that's where you can then see the real transformation of the mind. So it's calm and reflection that's going to help you get to this true wisdom. Any questions on this chapter? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go to chapter 45. This one is titled The Motivation. Monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Thus, monks, I have taught you the destination and the path leading to the destination. Whatever should be done, monks, by a compassionate teacher out of compassion for his disciples, aspiring for their welfare, that I have done for you. There are the feet of trees, monks. These are empty huts. Meditate, monks. Do not be complacent, lest you regret it later. This is my instruction to you. Why is that? Because he is out of evil one's range. So here, this motivation that the Buddha is talking about is there's this motivation to eliminate discontentedness. That's this first part. The Buddha is pointing to the Four Noble Truths and encouraging you and motivating you to apply effort to learn the Four Noble Truths. That's the very beginning of the path to enlightenment, where you understand the problem, the cause of the problem, the elimination, and the path forward. These are four things that you need to learn, which is the Four Noble Truths. So that's what he's describing here. These aren't the Four Noble Truths themselves. This is just how he points to them and references you to that teaching. Then he says, okay, he's taught you the destination and the path to the destination. The destination is enlightenment. He's taught what that is and what that's about. And then he's taught the path leading to this destination of enlightenment. And he's done this out of compassion for his students, aspiring for their welfare. And he's helped them to be able to cultivate the wisdom to get to enlightenment. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So a Buddha would have deep concern for the misfortune of others because their mind is completely liberated. They have deep wisdom to understand the path to enlightenment. But they can see the whole world around them is suffering. The whole world is highly discontent. They're causing their own discontentedness and the world doesn't even know it. So a Buddha can see the despair and the displeasure in the face of the people around them. They can see that all these people are causing their own discontentedness, and they have the answers to actually fix this. So out of compassion or concern for the misfortune of others, a Buddha will share their teachings for the rest of their life, helping countless people get to enlightenment. And then he motivates his students and encourages them to go meditate. Because if you don't meditate, if you're complacent, you're going to regret it later. When your mind is angry and frustrated, when you're lonely and bored, when you're feeling guilt and shame and resentfulness and jealous, you're going to regret having not meditated. So you need to be dedicated and diligent in order to develop your practice. That's the opposite of complacency. Complacency would be to not learn through books, to not come to classes, to not meditate. Those things are all complacency. But even if you allow an unwholesome thought to reside in the mind and you do nothing about it, this is complacency too. The Buddha talks about this, that if an unwholesome thought or an unwise thought comes into the mind, you need to take action to cut that off and let it go, applying right effort. So if you have right mindfulness and you can see that unwholesome thought, and then you apply right effort to be able to cut it off and let it go, now you're being dedicated, determined, and diligent. But if you allow that unwholesome and unwise thought to reside in the mind and you do nothing about it, then there's complacency in the mind. And then here he's referring complacency to meditation. Because sometimes you might think like, oh, let me just scroll one more Facebook, or let me just watch one more YouTube video. And next thing you know, you're actually tired and you can't actually do your meditation. So if you allow the mind to be complacent with your meditation, it'll be more and more challenging for you to get to enlightenment. So if you are disinterested in experiencing sadness and anger and frustration and all these other feelings, arise determination, dedication, and diligence. As you practice 2 or 3 meditation sessions a day for 30 minutes or more, as you build up to that over time, not allowing the mind to be complacent, that's what's going to ultimately help you get to the point where your mind isn't complacent and you no longer experience those discontent feelings like sadness and fears and boredom and loneliness and everything else. And having done that and been motivated and dedicated and diligent to practice, you get to this point where you're out of the evil one's range. What the Buddha is talking about here is this formless being that he refers to as Mara, or sometimes he refers to as the evil one. This is the being who's interested in causing calamity and unwholesome things in the world. This being is going to try to tempt you. Not only this being, but beings acting on this being's behalf. That if you're trying to eliminate a certain sensual desire, this being's going to try to tempt you into that sensual desire. Or anything else, any unwise decisions, this being is going to try to tempt you to do those things. Either this being or beings working on this being's behalf. But once you've cultivated your mind to get into the jhanas, where you have a certain amount of wisdom and a certain amount of development in the mind, this being is disinterested because this being understands that it can no longer tempt you any longer because there's too much wisdom and too much development in the mind. So that's how you get out of the range of the evil one, where you've blindfolded Mara, and Mara is no longer able to tempt you because you've cultivated too much wisdom and you've cultivated the mind too much. So this is the Buddha's teaching on motivating you to decide to learn the Four Noble Truths, to learn the path to enlightenment and what enlightenment is, and then actually do meditation to be able to get to enlightenment so that you're no longer tempted by this evil one. This is the closest thing you'll ever get from the Buddha, where he's really encouraging you to do your meditation and to learn the path to enlightenment. A enlightened being doesn't put pressure on people. They don't have expectations of people. They're not trying to control people. They're not trying to push and pressure people to do things. So this is the only thing you're ever going to get from the Buddha, where he's like, yeah, you're going to regret it if you don't meditate, right? But he's not trying to coerce you or convince you or anything like that. He's not using guilt, shame, or fear to motivate you to practice his teachings. He's just explaining to you, like, yeah, there's this evil being that's going to try to tempt you. And if you don't pay attention to developing your wisdom of the Four Noble Truths and the path to enlightenment and meditate, you're going to end up being tempted by this being, and you're going to regret these things as they're occurring later. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere, so we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 46. This is the last chapter for today. Normally we study 10 chapters, but this is the end of this book, so we're just going to the end of the book. This one is titled The Tathagata's Final Passing. The Tathagata is the Buddha. This is the way that he referred to himself. The Tathagata means the one who's discovered the truth, or the one who shares the truth. So a Tathagata is an individual who's gotten to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless beings to be able to get to enlightenment during their lifetime. And then they preserve their teachings in such a way that after their death, countless more people can get to enlightenment. So that's what a Buddha is. They meet these 3 criteria. So the Buddha would sometimes refer to himself as a Buddha, but rarely. He would more frequently refer to himself as the Tathagata, the one who's discovered the truth, or the one who shares the truth. And here, this discourse, he's going to share with you that he's about to die. This is a discourse where he's giving notice to his students that he's going to die in about 3 months. And he's kind of indicating to them what the core teachings are that they need to be learning and studying and practicing in order to get to enlightenment. So here, the title, The Tathagata's Final Passing. Monks, for this reason, those matters which I have discovered and proclaimed should be thoroughly learnt by you, practiced, developed, and cultivated. so that this holy life may endure for a long time, that it may be for the benefit and peacefulness of the multitude, many people, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit and peacefulness of heavenly beings and humans. And what are those matters? They are the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of mental power, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 mental powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the Noble Eightfold Path. And now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. The Tathagata's final passing will not be long delayed. 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take his final nibbana, final enlightenment. Ripe I am in years, my lifespan's determined. Now I go from you, having made myself my refuge. Monks, be untiring, mindful, disciplined, guarding your minds with well-collected thought. He who tirelessly keeps to the guidance and teachings, leaving birth behind, will put an end to sorrow and despair. Okay, so this is the Buddha giving kind of, some instructions as he's dying. He's helping people to know by giving them a heads up that, hey, I'm going to be dying in 3 months, which is very wise for a Buddha to do. This is how wise the Buddha was, that he knew that he was going to die 3 months in advance. An individual who's enlightened has the ability to know things in the future, and this is like a psychic ability that some enlightened beings have. They don't go around and show it off or be boastful or arrogant because of that. They've already eliminated the ego, but through eliminating the pollution of mind, an enlightened being can oftentimes know what's going to happen in the future without that thing having actually occurred yet. So the Buddha knew he was going to die 3 months in advance, and he wisely lets his students know, because any students who are attached to him, they can have these 3 months to kind of slowly let their attachment go as he gets closer and closer to death. And he's saying, okay, in order to keep these teachings in the world for a long time for the benefit of many people, which means if these teachings are preserved in the world for a long time to come, then many people can get to this peacefulness and joy of the enlightened mind, eliminating all discontentedness. And that's the ultimate goal of a Buddha, is to have their teachings be sustained in the world for as long as possible. And here we are 2,500 years later still talking about the Buddha. So his teachings have sustained for a very long time in the world. That's one of the criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. So he's interested in ensuring that his teachings are going to be preserved well into the future so that many people can get to this peacefulness of the enlightened mental state. And then he shares, what are those teachings that you should be learning and practicing in order to get to enlightenment? So here he shares some of the core teachings. There's other teachings besides this that an individual would need to learn, but this is what the Buddhists considered to be the core teachings. The 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 right efforts, the 4 bases of mental power, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 mental powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Noble Eightfold Path. These are all teachings that I share in various courses and retreats and various programs that I share. You will be learning all these different things along the way as part of your journey to enlightenment. These and other things that the Buddha actually taught. So then he says, okay, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. What he's sharing here is even this physical body of the Buddha, even this physical body of the Tathagata, it is impermanent. So even though he's shared these teachings for 45 years, from the age of 35 to 80, he's reminding his students that, this body is impermanent too. This existence that I'm now experiencing, this is impermanent. It's a conditioned object. It's going to decay. It's going to arise, it's going to change, and it's going to fade away. So he's then encouraging them to strive on untiringly. That's having the determination, the dedication, and the diligence. Because as you're working towards enlightenment, there can be various struggles and various challenges, various difficulties that you encounter. Getting to enlightenment is not easy, but it's also not difficult. And when you're down there struggling in the trenches and you're really challenged and having difficulties, you need that determination, the dedication, and the diligence to be able to strive on, even when you're experiencing tiredness. There's certain times where you need to rest and relax and allow the teachings that you've learned to really soak in and apply them in daily life. But you need to be sure that you don't allow the mind to be complacent. That's what the Buddha is describing in terms of strive on untiringly. So then he shares that, okay, he's going to die within 3 months, but he doesn't use the word death. Notice that he says that the final passing will not be long delayed. There are 3 months from now, the Tathagata will take his final nibbana, or final enlightenment. When somebody gets to enlightenment and then they get to the end of that life, we don't call it death, because if there's death, then there's going to be birth, aging, sickness, and death, grief, sorrow, pain, displeasure, and despair. All of that dependent origination that we talked about today, that's all been dismantled by the time you get to enlightenment. So you're no longer experiencing the aging and death and the discontentedness, that despair, the grief, the misery. That's all been eliminated. So we call an individual who gets to enlightenment and then experiences the end of this life, we call it final enlightenment. Because while you're alive, you can eliminate all your craving and clinging inside the mind. You can eliminate all of that, which ultimately is going to get you to this peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy that is the enlightened mind. And the mind will be permanently in that mental state where you'll no longer experience any discontent feelings whatsoever. But you're still going to experience physical pain, even in the enlightened mental state. But you'll experience it differently in the enlightened mental state than you did in the unenlightened mental state. In the unenlightened mental state, you're experiencing physical pain, but then you might be experiencing a certain amount of mental anguish along with that. Because the mind still has craving and clinging, when you stump your toe, for example, you feel the physical pain, but then there's a certain amount of mental anguish that you experience in the mind, because the mind is now discontent that the body is not permanently comfortable. There can be a craving in the mind for the body to be permanently comfortable. And now when you stump your toe, not only do you deal with the physical pain, but you have this mental anguish that goes along with it, which actually heightens the physical pain, and the mind experiences this mental anguish. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you're still going to experience the physical pain. You still might stump your toe, but there's no mental anguish whatsoever. That the mind no longer has craving and clinging. You understand that stumping your toe, it's an impermanent thing. So the physical pain that you experience in the enlightened mind, it's very muted compared to what you experience in the unenlightened state. You still have that physical pain because there's the mind and the body that are still together. You can't eliminate that last little bit of clinging until you actually get to the end of this life. So that's why we call it final enlightenment, where now the body and the mind have broken apart. They've now separated, and now you won't experience physical pain anymore. In the enlightened mental state, you need to experience a bit of pain, because if you're standing too close to the fire, for example, you need to know, like, I'm standing too close to the fire. I need to make the decision to move. So that physical pain is there to tell the mind, hey, something's wrong. You need to make a decision and remedy this issue. So if you're in meditation, for example, and your hip or your knee is bothering you, or your back is bothering you, if you notice a pain in the physical body, this is the body's way of making sure the mind knows, hey, take some corrective action here. There's something wrong and you need to change your position, for example. Or if you're standing too close to a fire, or if you hit your hand with a hammer and your hand now hurts, you need to learn to be more focused and more concentrated with the hammer. So this physical pain is teaching you and helping you to understand that you need to make wiser decisions. So that physical pain will always be there until you get to final enlightenment. And that physical pain is going to be muted in the enlightened mental state. It's not going to be anywhere near what you experienced when you were in the unenlightened mental state. So this is why we call it final nibbana, or final enlightenment, because that last little bit of clinging that the mind is connected to the body, that is now separated at the time of the end of this life. And then the Buddha finishes this up with saying, ripe I am in years, my lifespan is determined. Now I go from you, having made myself my refuge. What a refuge is protection. That you might think of a refuge as like a cabin on a mountain somewhere, or some castle. This might be your refuge, but it's not really fully protected because you're still dealing with your own thoughts. If you train your mind to the path and you get to this enlightened mental state, now your mind's fully protected, because now your mind has this protection that it will never experience discontentedness ever again. The mind will never be shaken up. So the Buddha has made himself his own refuge, because a Buddha has gotten to enlightenment by himself. And now he's trained his mind, and his mind's fully protected. It will never experience discontentedness ever again from the time that an individual is actually enlightened. So that's why he's calling this his refuge. And you can get to that same refuge, which is a real refuge, which is the enlightened mental state. Being in a cabin on the mountain or in a castle, that's not a true refuge, because your mind is still dealing with your own thoughts. You're still experiencing discontentedness. Then the Buddha says, monks, be untiring, mindful, and disciplined. Guard your minds with well-collected thought. Guarding your mind is to practice mindfulness, guarding the 6 sense bases, that you're aware of these 6 sense bases, you're aware of the mind. And now as there's contact through these 6 sense bases, if you're noticing any arising of discontentedness, whether it's a conditioned pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant, you cut it off as a bodily sensation. This is how you guard the mind, with well-collected thought. He who tirelessly keeps to the guidance and teachings, leaving birth behind, will put an end to sorrow and despair. So he's saying, he who is dedicated and diligent to learning and practicing the teachings, they will escape the cycle of rebirth, and they will put an end to this grief, pain, sorrow, displeasure, and despair that the mind keeps experiencing over and over and over and over and over again. So here he's encouraging the students to maintain their motivation, their dedication, and their diligence. What questions do you guys have on this chapter? You can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So here Francis is asking in Zoom, do we practice the Eightfold Path one by one? The answer is you're learning all 8 steps of the Eightfold Path, and you're practicing all 8 steps. You're not mastering one before you move on to the other. You need to practice all 8. So you learn all of them and you dial them into your life more and more closely. So if you're noticing that you're really struggling with right speech, you're still practicing right view, right intention, and all the others, but you might really put a lot of focus for a few weeks on right speech. You might review the 5 factors of well-spoken speech in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening, and you might check in on those and look at how you've done well or how you've not done so well, and you really refresh that in your mind before you go out in your day, perhaps. And now this is going to help you to arise right speech more and more in the mind. Or you might be having challenges with some of the other steps, and you really would like to focus in on those, maybe 1 or 2 steps that you're having difficulties with. Get those to a point where you're practicing them well, and then where you see any of the others you're not practicing so well, dial them in closer and closer. So, for example, in order to practice something like right speech, which is the 3rd step, you need to have right view, that your mind is causing its own discontentedness. And then to practice right speech, you also need to have right mindfulness and right effort, where you're aware of the mind and what's going on in the mind. Are there any cravings there? And if you notice any cravings, you cut that off and you let it go. And then also where you see wholesome qualities in your mind, you need to apply that right effort as well to bring forth your right speech. So all of these steps are actually working together in order to move the mind to the enlightened mental state. And you don't need to master one before you move on to the other, because you actually wouldn't be able to master one to move on to the other, because all 8 of them need to be working together in order to support each other on the path to enlightenment. Is it good to do daily reflection? Yes, if you're able to do that daily or every 2 or 3 days or once a week, it's important to look inward, look at the mind, and look at situations that you've encountered in your day or in your week. Look at things that you did well, and you know that you're doing well in those things, and continue to support those, encouraging those, not allowing them to fade. But then where you see that you could have made improvements in things like your speech or actions or other things that you're doing in life, look at those things too and be honest with yourself. Be objective with yourself and realize that, yeah, I could have did this better. You know, when I was cleaning up that water with Mom, I didn't say anything that was unwise. So I maintained right speech because I didn't say anything unwise. But internally, I was still struggling. I was still annoyed with her. So I'd like to do that better. So the next time I'm in that situation where Mom spills her water, I'm going to work on not being annoyed and just clean it up with a smile on my face, right? So each time you do this, it'll help you to train the mind to be better and better in each individual situation. So being reflective and looking at the things you've done well and things that you haven't done so well, that is what will cultivate the wisdom to then aim to do better in the future or continue to do the things that you're currently doing. All right, got it, teacher. Thanks. You're welcome, Francis. Okay, we have some questions coming in here on YouTube. This is from Chrissy. Hi, Teacher David. Thank you, sir. So when the mind experiences discontentment, when a loved one experiences physical pain, it's due to the attachment to that being. Yes, that's correct. Because your children, your life partner, your parents, all these other beings around you, whether it's your dog, these beings are impermanent. They're going to sometimes be completely comfortable in their physical body, and sometimes they're going to experience injuries, and they're going to be experiencing discomfort. That's impermanence. The thing that's causing the discontentment to arise is there's craving and clinging and attachment to that person, wanting them to be permanently comfortable. The mind doesn't realize that that's not possible. This person can't be permanently comfortable. So you would like to train the mind that when somebody is experiencing any kind of uncomfortableness, that you just remain calm and you understand, like, okay, of course they're uncomfortable because this is impermanence. They can't be permanently comfortable. So that's what helps you to maintain that equanimity, the calmness and composure, and then make wise decisions in a situation. But when you have attachment and your mind's shaken up, that's because it's craving for them to be permanently comfortable, and that's just not possible. So you would like to remind yourself that of course they're experiencing this situation, because they're impermanent and they're not going to be able to be permanently comfortable. And then you can maintain your calmness and composure. But there's also things you can be doing in order to eliminate your attachment to those people that are closest to you. I've taught classes on this and I've recorded them, and I'm going to be teaching future classes as well. Whenever I teach the Harmony in Relationships course, one of the classes that I teach within that course is how to eliminate attachment to those who are closest to you. And I've recorded this once, but now students can attend any of the courses, any of the retreats that I teach here in Chiang Mai. You can attend by Zoom. I'm opening Zoom now for each individual class and course that I'm teaching at the temple. And then some of those are actually recorded as well. And then you can go back and look at the recordings, because what do you do in the moment, which is what I just shared? Like, you just remind yourself in the moment that when somebody is injured or experiencing discomfort, you remind yourself of impermanence. But also there's proactive things that you can be doing in order to eliminate your attachment to people that are close to you. And of course, the breathing mindfulness meditation, the loving kindness meditation, the generosity, those things are helping that. But there's other things you can be doing to proactively eliminate your attachment. So once you get into a situation where someone close to you is experiencing discomfort, then your mind won't have as much attachment and you'll notice less and less discontentedness, eventually getting to the point where there's no discontentedness even when someone who's close to you is experiencing some kind of injury or some traumatic event. Looks like Mayuli has a question here as well. To get to the first stage of enlightenment, do we have to get the right speech, 5 factors down pat, or can we work that throughout one's reach first stage? So to get to the first stage of enlightenment, it requires an individual to practice a certain amount of moral conduct, because you need to eliminate the third fetter among all the other fetters that you need to eliminate, which is personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. Those are the first 3 fetters that you need to eliminate to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Those wrong behaviors that the Buddha is talking about to eliminate that third fetter, those are the baseline teachings of the Eightfold Path around moral conduct, which is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Eliminating kind of like the first fold. So with speech, that would be to eliminate lying, to eliminate slander or gossip, to eliminate harsh speech, and eliminate frivolous speech. That's the first 4 as part of right speech. The 5 factors of well-spoken speech is a deeper teaching that one will practice as you move through the stages of enlightenment, but you can really work on that at any time. But to get to the first stage of enlightenment around speech, you need to eliminate those 4 things: the lying, the slander, the harsh speech, and the frivolous speech. And then around right action, you need to eliminate the taking of life, the stealing, and the sexual misconduct. And then you need to purify your livelihood to the first fold. There's 2 folds of right livelihood. So I teach both. If you look in volume 12, chapter 14, you'll be able to see right livelihood, and you'll need to purify right speech, right action, and right livelihood to eliminate the wrong behaviors. And the reason why is because as long as you're putting out moral conduct that is unwise, it's going to keep producing unwholesome results for you. It's going to keep coming back. So in order to kind of shut down this flood of unwholesome results or unwholesome karma coming back to you, you need to shut down your unwise decisions around moral conduct. And by cultivating the wisdom of the moral conduct related to the natural law of karma, which is described in the Eightfold Path, by shutting that down and only practicing the wisdom that is part of right speech, right action, right livelihood, which is the baseline Eightfold Path, that's what's going to eliminate the wrong behavior. But then each of those, whether it's right speech, right action, or right livelihood, it goes deeper beyond the first fold of the Eightfold Path. Then Mayuli has another question here. I find the 5 factors of well-spoken speech to be challenging when it comes to the right time, with benefit and with constant calm tone. Yes, as long as you have craving, desire, attachment in the mind, you're going to find right speech to be quite challenging. So in relationships where you have the most craving and attachment, you'll find right speech to be the most challenging. So maybe your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, people like this, where like if you talked with me, you could probably use right speech all day long because you're not attached to me. You don't have craving, right? Or somebody else, maybe a coworker or your neighbor next door. You don't have attachment to them, so it's easy for you to practice right speech in those situations. But where you have longing and yearning, you have that attachment, that craving, it's going to be harder for you to practice right speech. So that's why you're working with all the factors of the Eightfold Path, like what I was explaining to Francis, that you need to work all those factors of the Eightfold Path to bring down your cravings so that then you can practice more and more of your moral conduct. So you'll be better at that when you're doing your breathing mindfulness meditation, practicing your generosity, doing your loving kindness meditation and practicing loving kindness. When you fully develop the Eightfold Path, that's what you need in order to get to that first stage of enlightenment. You'll find that practicing right speech becomes easier. And you just need to dial this in closer and closer. Where you have mistakes, where you have mishaps, where you trip over and stumble over your feet, apologize to the person, and then aim to do better. Do that reflection that I was talking about with Francis, where you look inward. And if you have a conversation that goes really well, look at that and be like, wow, I did the right time. I spoke what was true, gentle, beneficial, with a mind of loving kindness. I would like to continue to do that. That was really helpful. Look at how that conversation went really well for me. And then in a situation where you didn't practice the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, look at that too. And you might decide that if you're really having difficulty with speaking at the right time, you just spend the next 3, 4, 5 weeks just working on honing the right time and never talking unless it's the right time, using all 3 aspects of speaking at the right time. So this is the way that I did it, is that when I looked at the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, there were times where I just worked on for a week or 2 or 3 speaking at the right time, and that was it. I just simplified it and just really focused on that. Because sometimes when you're looking at all the factors, it can be really challenging. So if you go out into the world just being interested in practicing the right time to speak, then you can do that and get really good at that. The way that I think about this is it's like a cart. If you have a cart with 4 different wheels on it, whichever one is the squeaky wheel, you're going to put oil on that squeaky wheel. The other 3 wheels are working pretty well, but this squeaky wheel is hindering you from pushing this cart. So you need to put oil on that squeaky wheel. So if the squeaky wheel for you around right speech is speaking at the right time, then you put oil on that. You go out into the world for a week or 2 or 3 and just work on speaking at the right time. Or if it's speaking gentle, or if it's speaking with a mind of loving kindness. And the squeaky wheel is the one that, yes, you're the most challenged with, but also the squeaky wheel is the one that has the most impact. So if you're noticing that your harsh speech is causing you the most difficulties in your life with your children or other people around you, that's the squeaky wheel. Really work on honing your gentle speech, speaking with the right tone, the tempo, and the word choice. You would like to have a really gentle tone, tempo, and word choice. And that's going to take you time to dial that in because the mind is so used to speaking harshly and because of the cravings in there. So by training the mind to speak gentle with the tone, tempo, and word choice, now you can hone that in, and that's going to help you to reduce and eliminate your cravings. All right, great questions, everyone. You're welcome, Chrissy. Nice to help you as well. Looks like there's another question here from Chrissy. Would it help to try to go a day without speaking if I struggle with right speech? You can do that occasionally. some people get really trapped in that and they will go like extended periods of time without speaking, like not just days, but like weeks and months. They have this thing in Thailand sometimes where people tie a string around their neck with a sign that tells people that they're not going to speak. Well, this can help you to reduce your unwholesome karma because you're not speaking at all, but it's not helping you to produce wholesome karma because you're not actually practicing right speech. So if going a day without speaking helps you to be introspective and reflective and allows you to kind of calm the mind down, do that. But don't get trapped into doing it for like a week or 2 or 3 like some people do, because ultimately you're going to need to practice right speech and do it in small little increments, right? Like if you have a certain conversation where maybe you can come out and you can have this one conversation for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can walk away from it and then spend some quiet time reflecting on that conversation of what went well and what didn't go well. This is really helpful for you. I would do this oftentimes when I was trying to help my wife with different things. I would go into her room. I knew that this was a pretty challenging issue for me to talk about, and I would just try to talk as far as I could talk. And if I noticed any kind of frustration or agitation arising, I would excuse myself, apologize, and I would leave the room. And I might come back 2 or 3 days later or 2 or 3 hours later. And then I would maybe go a little bit further in the conversation. And each time it would get more and more comfortable. This is like the incremental improvement that you would like to do with the mind. And if you've developed mindfulness or awareness of mind, you should be able to see when these things are occurring. And the way that you can help the mind to gradually improve is to step away when you're noticing the agitation and the irritation starting to arise. Don't allow that to pollute the mind, because then things are going to become unhinged and there's going to be a lot of drama. So protect the mind and protect your relationships, that wherever you see any kind of agitation or frustration coming up in the mind, walk away, break contact, value the relationship and value the wholesomeness and the closeness in the relationship. Really appreciate the relationships that you're cultivating and really protect it, so that if you inject any harshness into this conversation, it's going to just damage the relationship, and that's not what you're interested in doing. Because as long as you allow the mind to continue to go down that path of harshness, it will continue to do that. So you've got to restrain the mind and pull it back. There were times where I'd be like mid-sentence and I'd had to cut that off and let it go. And then as I cut that back over time, maybe it was on the tip of my tongue. Boy, I really wanted to say something, but I had to cut it back. I had to pull it back. I had to restrain it. So at different times, I was able to cut it back further and further. And then it got to the point where it wasn't on the tip of my tongue anymore. It was just in the mind. And the mind was thinking about saying this thing. It wasn't on the tip of the tongue and I wasn't mid-sentence. It was just in the mind circulating. Like, I really want to say this to that person. Then I had to cut that back. And ultimately you uproot it where, you don't have any thoughts or any inclination of saying anything unwise or unwholesome to anybody whatsoever. That's where the mind's been fully purified. You'll be able to get to that point. But as you're working towards that point, you need to catch it sooner and sooner and cut it back more and more, all the way through those various stages that I just mentioned and talked about. Great questions, everyone. Let me just see if there's anything else here. Mayuli, you're welcome. Pleased to help you. You're very welcome. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So I would like to thank all of you guys for studying today and studying up to this point with the Teachings of the Buddha. We're in volume 10. We just finished that. And now we're moving into volume 11. There's 3 more volumes before we finish out the Pali Canon and English study group. We're moving into volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. You're going to see the teachings of the Buddha here on the realm of hell, animal realm, afflicted spirits, the human realm, and the heavenly realm. It's going to move you through all of those realms, helping you to understand these various realms and what is experienced there. Understand that the Buddha is sharing this because this is true reality. This is important for you to understand, and you're not interested in believing any of these things. And as you're reading and you're learning, notice that the Buddha never uses guilt, shame, or fear to motivate you. He's just explaining to you true reality of what's happening in these various realms so that you can understand. And he's sharing this based on his own direct experience because he understood from his memories of his previous lives in these various realms what was actually transpiring in these various realms. So he's sharing that with you for very important reasons, which we're going to talk about in the next class. He's not just sharing this with you because it's interesting or it's cool or he just wanted to slip in the cycle of rebirth into his teachings. There's specific reasons why he's sharing the cycle of rebirth with you. So we'll talk about that as we go through that book. We're going to be studying that book for a good 3 months or so because there's quite a few chapters. I think there's like 150 chapters in that particular book. So we're going to be studying it for quite a while. So you can download that from our website, buddhadailywisdom.com. You can take it and go print it. You can order it on Amazon if you'd like, or you can get a copy here at the temple because I have printed versions there as well. So thank you all for joining for today's class with the Pali Canon English Study Group. Tomorrow, we're going to be in the group learning program where we're going to be in Volume 1, Chapter 14. This is titled Cultivating Healthy Mental States, Loving Kindness, Compassion, Sympathetic Joy, and Equanimity. I'm going to explain what all 4 of these healthy mental states are. I'm going to explain to you the solutions that they're remedying, certain unwholesome qualities of mind, certain discontent feelings that are being experienced in the mind, that these are the antidotes or the solutions or the remedies for. And then I'm going to teach you how to cultivate them in the mind as well. So you're welcome to attend that class and learn. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be sharing with you guided breathing mindfulness meditation that you're welcome to come to class or listen to the recording in YouTube, Facebook, or on the podcast where you can meditate together. And then I open up to any and all questions that you guys might have on the path to enlightenment. So thank you all for joining for today's class. Perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Be well. Have a lovely rest of your day. Sawadee khap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.